Today, we're breaking down a very specific and, let's be honest, pretty controversial analysis of the war in Ukraine. This all comes from the perspective of former intelligence officer Scott Ritter. We're going to walk through his argument about the strategy, what's happening on the battlefield, and what he sees as the inevitable endgame for both Russia and Europe. Okay, let's get into it. So, the entire analysis we're examining today really hinges on this one single assertion. Scott Ritter's argument is that when you actually weigh all the factors, resources, military experience, political will, the long-term odds are just completely stacked in Russia's favor. He frames this not as some possibility, but as a hard reality that he believes the West just chose to ignore. And that claim right there is the foundation for everything else we're about to unpack. All right, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at what Ritter calls NATO's high-stakes gamble. Then, we'll dive into his assessment of the reality on the battlefield. From there, we'll examine the political fallout in the West, explore what he predicts Russia's terms for peace will be, and then wrap up by looking at the potential for a radically new European order. Okay, let's kick things off with Section 1, NATO's high-stakes gamble. The whole argument here is built around this idea of a casino. The source material claims that NATO didn't have a real, sustainable strategy. Instead, it was like they walked into a casino and put all their chips on one massive, all-or-nothing bet that was pretty much destined to fail from the start. So what exactly was this bet? Well, according to Ritter, it was a three-part gamble that had to happen all at once. First, the idea was that military pressure, using Ukraine as a proxy, would just bleed Russia dry. Second, that these massive, unprecedented economic sanctions would make the Russian economy completely collapse. And third, that if you combine those two things, you'd get massive political instability, and boom, Putin's government would fall. And the source's assessment of this whole strategy is, well, it's blunt. It's called a stupid bet that, frankly, never was going to happen. The argument is that the economic blowback was completely predictable, and that it was always going to hit Europe way, way harder than Russia. So from this perspective, that failed gamble is what sets the stage for everything that comes next. So if the gamble failed, what were the consequences on the ground? Well, that brings us right to Section 2, the military reality, according to this analysis. And this is where we get to the human cost, as described in this analysis. And the numbers are just staggering. Citing what he says is leaked data, Ritter claims Ukraine is losing around 90,000 soldiers. That's killed or missing every single month. Within this analysis, that number is just seen as completely and totally unsustainable. This slide really illustrates the massive imbalance that the analysis claims is happening. The argument is that for every one Russian soldier lost, Ukraine is losing somewhere between 10 and 15 soldiers. From Ritter's point of view, that kind of disparity tells you everything you need to know about who is actually winning this war on the battlefield. According to this viewpoint, the Ukrainian army hasn't just been worn down. It's been effectively destroyed and then rebuilt from scratch multiple times. The argument is that Ukraine is now trying to build its fourth army, and this time it's increasingly filled with personnel who just don't have proper military training, all while facing a battle-hardened Russian force. And this quote pretty much sums up the entire evaluation of the bigger military picture. The argument here is that NATO, for all its advanced technology and funding, is a paper tiger. It just lacks the kind of real-world, large-scale combat experience that Russia has been gaining. He says Russia knows how to manage this specific kind of fight, and NATO, well, it just doesn't. So, with the military situation laid out, let's switch over to the political front. Section 3 gets into the argument that the whole Western alliance is starting to show some serious cracks under the pressure of a failing strategy and a tanking economy. And the analysis points to some very specific examples. You've got German Chancellor Scholz, who apparently did a complete 180, pulling back on sending certain weapons. You have French President Macron suddenly shifting his tone, saying Europe has to talk with Russia eventually. And then you have countries like Slovakia and Hungary outright rejecting the war, plus public opinion turning against it in places like the Czech Republic. It's all presented as evidence of a crumbling consensus. So, if the military front is a disaster and the political front is falling apart for the West, how does this all end? That brings us to Section 4, which covers the predicted endgame, a piece that is dictated entirely on Russia's terms. Ritter lays out three conditions that he claims are absolutely non-negotiable for Russia. First, the total demilitarization of Ukraine. Second, a goal Russia calls denazification, which this analysis specifies means removing what it calls Banderist ultranationalist ideology from any position of power. And third, and this is a big one, a permanent constitutional guarantee of neutrality, meaning Ukraine can never join NATO, period. So, the bottom line from this section is pretty clear. The analysis argues there is simply no path to victory for Ukraine. And because of that, peace isn't going to be a negotiation between equals. It's going to be an acceptance of terms laid out by Moscow, a reality that, according to Ritter, Western leaders are very slowly and painfully starting to wake up to. Now, for our final section, because this analysis doesn't just stop at Ukraine's borders. No, it makes a much, much bigger prediction that the consequences of this war are going to completely reshape the entire political map of Europe. What Ritter predicts is basically a domino effect. First, continuing to fund the war bankrupts European economies. That economic pain then leads to massive political upheaval. You see populist, nationalist parties surging to power. And that, in turn, could lead to key countries like France and Germany just leaving the EU, causing the collapse of the entire European Union and taking NATO down with it. And this quote really captures the ultimate warning here. The argument is that by dragging out this conflict, European leaders aren't saving Ukraine. They're actually guaranteeing their own political and economic destruction, creating an outcome that is, in the end, a disaster for Europe. And that brings us to our final and very provocative question. The source material here isn't just predicting the end of a war. It's predicting the end of the entire European order that's been in place since the Cold War. So, we're left to wonder, if this analysis of a chaotic, fracturing future is even remotely accurate, what kind of Europe and what kind of world is going to come next?